You're listening to the Midlife with Courage podcast. This is where women in midlife come for inspiration, motivation, and sometimes a little education to help them flourish after 40. Let's get started. Hey. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midlife with Courage. I'm Kim Benoit, your host. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm also very happy to have my guest here today. Her name is Amber Wardell, and she is a doctor of psychology. Welcome to the podcast, Amber.
Hi, it's so great to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. Why don't we just get started? Why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us where in the world you are and what you do.
Sure. So I am in Atlanta, Georgia, and I live here with my husband and my two kids and our dog and three lizards. And I'm a doctor of psychology. I'm a contributor to Psychology Today. And most of what I do in my book, as well as online, is talk about issues related to marriage, motherhood, and mental health. And I've been very excited to come and speak with you because I have a new project coming up that's all about aging defiantly instead of defying aging. And so I was
Oh,
really excited that you wanted me to come and speak to you because I feel like we have
I
a lot of
love it.
things in common.
Yes, aging defiantly. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear more about that because I think we all need to do that. But before we get into your story, why don't you tell us a time when you felt the most courageous?
Oh, when I felt the most courageous. What a great question. It's funny. I just had this conversation with my daughter the other day because she got her ears pierced and
Uh,
she was like crying because it hurt. And they told her at the end that she was brave. And she said, I wasn't brave because I cried. And I said, well, honey, courage and bravery isn't my quote, but it's being scared and doing it anyway.
sure.
And so for me, when I think about probably the moment when I felt the most courageous was giving birth to my kids, because I did that at home, with a doula and a midwife. And so I had no medicine and no pain relief or anything like that. And I was terrified. I was so scared. And then to like deal with the pain and the sometimes the regret of like, I should have just gone to a hospital. I should have just gone to a hospital, and reaching that point in transition where you realize I don't think I can do this, and then doing it and like roaring these children into the planet and then just being like, I did that. Oh my god, I did that. That'll always be a peak moment of courage for me, I think.
I love it. I think that's amazing. So tell us about your story. What led you to write your book, which we're going to talk about? You start wherever you feel like starting.
Okay. So I guess probably the best place to start would be right around the time of the pandemic when it reached stateside, because I just was like, we were all sheltering in place, and I was like, well, nothing much else to do except maybe get on social media and try to create community there. And so I started posting on a lot more on Instagram and TikTok and places like that. And I fairly quickly built a community of people who were on similar journeys as mine, which were dealing with, like, maybe for the first time addressing your mental health seriously, like going to therapy and things like that. And I spent about 3 years just talking about my mental health journey and what I was doing in therapy. And in the course of that time, I also separated from my husband for 6 months, and then we reconciled. And so I began talking about all of the things that had to happen in order for that to take place. And as I was sharing these things online and seeing how there were so many women who were relating to these stories and who, for the first time, were sort of looking at their own, not just their own mental health, but saying to themselves, I don't know that I've ever really taken the time to take care of my mental health. I was like, someone should write a book about that. And so I decided to write this one, Beyond Self-Care Potato Chips, Choosing Nourishing Self-Care in a Quick Fix Culture. And it's basically all of the stories that I've told over the years, but using the stories as a vehicle to tie it back to principles from therapy and cognitive psychology, and talking about how we can better take care of ourselves in a culture that doesn't always encourage women to do so.
Yeah, and I want to get into that aspect of it too. There's just so much there. I mean, we could talk for hours today, but we won't. Don't worry, listeners. But you were talking about where you kind of lost your old self in this whole process of separating, and maybe it was probably even before that. Can we talk about that a little bit, that aspect of it?
Yeah, women are so often, I don't know if you've seen, but like there's been a lot of media right now about Taylor Swift is turning 35 and she's not married and doesn't have children yet. Crisis is coming for her,
Oh, no.
right? And it really aptly demonstrates what our culture, as progressive as it is today, still thinks about the role of women and what our lives are supposed to be lived for. And I feel like a lot of us, even those of us who claim to be, the most liberated, we still ascribe to a lot of these ideas that were pushed onto us from our youth. And the way that I lost myself was that I had just bought so fully into this idea that, well, now I'm married and now I'm a mom, and my job is only to take care of my home and my husband and my kids. And so I quit my job, my high paying job where I was the director of cognitive science, like a title, my
Wow.
dream title, senior director of cognitive science at 28 years old. I quit that job. I, decided I was saying I was going to homeschool my kids, which I would love to homeschool my children, but I learned that I do not personally have what it takes to do that. Um, and I was just like, I'm going to be a homemaker and I'm going to all these things. And that was never the journey that I was on. A woman who spent all these years getting a PhD, who had a career in mind, who always wanted to achieve. And then I just got married and had kids and rejected all of that. And I realize now that it was this all or nothing thinking, that there's no middle ground here. So I just swooped way too far in the other direction and lost sight of everything that I had ever loved or cared about, everything that made me me. And that was a really upsetting realization to make. And there was a time where I blamed my family for that. I was like, if because I got married and all of this has created this life for me. And part of what I address in the book is that I had to realize that no, those were my choices, and
Mhm.
the only person who can fix this now is me.
Yeah, I wrote down this quote from there. You wanted to live in a world that gave you all the, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't a direct quote, but you wanted to
Mhm.
live in a world that gave you all the things you needed and deserved, but maybe that had to begin with you. And that's exactly what you just said. I think that's something we all need to come to at some point, and that's kind of my whole theme this last year or two of this podcast is looking inside yourself. Is there something that just clicked in you, or was it a gradual process where you kind of realized that?
I had a few shake up moments along the way, if you will. One of them, and they all came from my therapist, one of them was, you can't heal where you were broken. And I have brought that with me everywhere I've gone. And so that was in that moment, my therapist was talking about separating from my husband. He had said, if you want any chance of saving this, you have to go somewhere else to heal. You cannot be doing the healing in the place where you broke. And I'm learning that that applies kind of everywhere in our lives. That sometimes, when our relationships or the world, our jobs, or whatever it is, are breaking us, sometimes we have to make the difficult choice to pull away and draw into ourselves and do our healing on an individual journey. And that, that's not always possible. You can't just up and leave your job. But even that can be a mindset, right? It can be, I'm going to check out from the things that have captured my attention and interest at this job that's making me miserable, and I'm just going to go to work and do my job every day, and then I'm going to come home and I'm going to focus on me. And I just feel like everywhere, even, there's a chapter in the book that's about basically flipping over your table and all the people who are sitting at it and dismissing everyone and saying, I'm going to sit at a seat of prominence at my own table for a little while and figure out what it is that I want and what I'm doing here. And so I guess I would say that's probably a big wake up call moment for me, was just realizing sometimes you got to go inward.
Sure. Yeah. And that's really hard. I found, and I'm sure you have too. A lot of times we look to the outside to tell us what's important. And we relied on that for so long that it's hard to go, no, wait, it's me, it's my turn now.
Oh, it's my turn now. I love that. I love that because I think that a lot of us, when we start that journey, it's almost with like we're loath to do it because We also know, right, that once we start looking inward, we already understand that there's going to be an element of having to address the things that are our fault, and that's really hard. And we say words like, well, I'm that's victim blaming. If I take accountability for my role in how I got hurt here, then that's victim blaming. And I could talk at length about that. But I think that we're a little bit reluctant to do this work because we don't want to come to those realizations of like, how have I played a role in my own heartbreak and my own dissatisfaction with my life? But when you say like, it's my turn now,
Mhm.
what a wonderful way to reframe that.
Mhm. Mhm.
To just be like, yeah, it's my turn. I get to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that just changes your whole perspective of it, I think.
Yeah.
Also, in your book, I love the name of the book too. And I love how you talk about, beyond self-care, potato chips, choosing nourishing self-care in a quick fix culture. First of all, I totally agree with the quick fix in so many areas of our lives. But the way you talk about the potato chips and how we need to, you never get enough. One is not enough. And anyway, I love how you relate that and share your stories of learning to come to like your self-actualization in the book. You kind of talk about that, the fairy tales and how the princess marries the prince charming and then that's it, that's the end, and it's really not. Can we talk about that a little bit, that idea of love
Yeah.
is the be all and end all, and it's really not.
Yeah. So that's what you're talking about is my favorite chapter in the whole book.
Ah,
And so, yeah, it kind of at the beginning of that chapter isn't it interesting that our favorite fairy tales end at the beginning?
mhm.
They say, oh, they're married and now they live happily ever after. And the question that I raise in the book is like, well, I want to know what happens when the unenchanted familiar sets in, when the honeymoon is over, when now we're having to make decisions about our joint bank account and what school to put our children in, and all of these things that are not romantic or exciting at all. And
Mhm.
so I think that so much of and men get this too, right?
Sure.
Men get this indoctrination too, and it's unfair for them as well but they're given a different set of expectations and roles they have to live up to. For women, what we get is this idea that the pinnacle of a happiness and success for a woman is a happy marriage and a carriage ride off into the sunset. And now you've done it. Go you did the thing.
Yay.
And when we position that as the goal, as what we are meant to achieve, what is it that's supposed to come next? And so I talk about in the book about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there are several needs that are the just basic ones that we all need, and these include safety, food and water. We need sexual relationships, all of these things that are just kind of pertinent to being a human being. And if we don't have those things, they're called deficiency needs. If we don't have them, we have to get them. Otherwise, we cannot thrive.
Mhm.
There's one last need that's at the very top that is called self-actualization. And it actually comes after love. So, where the fairy tales are telling us this pyramid ends is here at love. You have safety, you have food and water, you have all these things, and now you have love and you can stop. The growth need comes above that. And the growth need is self actualization. And what we should be looking for in the post marriage, post motherhood years, frankly, we should be doing it all along. But just for the sake of the metaphor, right? Like, okay, I found my Prince Charming. Now, how do he and I work together to mutually enrich each other's lives, to keep each other growing and self actualizing and finding out new things about ourselves and exploring with curiosity how we are as individuals and how we work together as a couple, and how, as a couple, we are moving through the world and influencing other people and making changes and leaving legacy. And we just like women don't get that messaging. It's just like, oh, you're married, well done. And I hate that so much. I want us to be the kind of women who say marriage is if we decide to do that, right? And that shouldn't even be the standard. But if
Right.
we decide to get married, that's not the end of our journey towards becoming who we're meant to be.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's such an important message. And honestly, I think if we had that message earlier, there would probably be less divorces. Do you think?
Absolutely. Because God, man, I remember being in my early 20s and telling my parents, I don't think I ever want to get married. I had just ended an engagement to the boy I had been with since high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't know if I want to get married. I don't know if I want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
But this relationship escalator that tells you that, well, you're going to have regrets if you don't get married and if you don't have kids. And so
Mm-hmm.
you whisk yourself along on this relationship escalator. And a message that is hard for me to share, but that I do it every now and then, is to say, hey, you know what? I always said I didn't want to be a mom. And though I would never, ever change how my life played out because I wouldn't have my kids,
Mm-hmm.
now that I have them, I know more than ever that I probably wasn't meant to have kids. It is
Really?
hard for me. Yeah, it is
Wow.
hard. It doesn't come naturally for me the way some women say that it does.
Mm-hmm.
And as they get older now, like now they're about to be 7 and 9. And now I'm finding motherhood fun and I'm really stepping into my role in it. Because
Mm-hmm.
now they're a little older, I can relate to them. But when they were, I want to cry talking about this, when they were babies and toddlers, I got so lost in depression and anxiety, and I was miserable. And although I wouldn't change anything, I do think that if women were allowed to say, consequence free, I don't want to have children, that life isn't for me, and people didn't instantly say, you're going to regret it, I do think the divorce rate would be lower. I think there would be less children ending up in therapy one day. And this is a criticism of our system and our culture, not of women.
Hey, ladies. I just wanted to thank you for listening to this episode. And I also wanted to remind you that there are a couple easy ways for you to support the show, and they are both free. The first thing, maybe you've already done this. That's great. Thank you so much. Go to the platform where you listen and click the follow button. Super easy. You'll get notifications of every episode the day they come out. If you want to get those notifications earlier, you can go ahead to my website, www.midlifewithcourage.com, and subscribe to the website. What that means is you'll get an email every Monday with an inspirational message and a link to the episode so that you can listen to it ahead of everyone else. So if that sounds great to you, I would love for you to do that. Join me on my website. You'll also get notified of some wonderful new things I have coming down the road. I can't wait to share them with you. So remember, follow and subscribe. Let's get back to the episode. Right, right. You are very brave for saying that. I commend you for that. I get it. I mean, yeah, we're not all cut out to be a mother, but like you said, society just tells, oh, you have to. But yeah, no, you don't. And I think I just recently, there was an article about people who are deciding not to have kids and the grandparents. Yeah, the grandparents are, I'm never going to be a grandparent. So there's this whole thing to it, but it's okay. We have to redefine what we're telling women and everybody basically in this crazy life. We talked about you separated from your husband and you reconciled. Tell the listeners about that, deciding to go back together. And that wasn't easy, I'm sure. And I'm sure it's something you kind of keep working on. Can we talk about,
Yeah.
I'm only asking this, not only, but we've had a couple guests who decided that their marriage wasn't working and they decided to end it. And so I love that you're telling us not to judge them or anything. That's just what worked best for them. But you're telling us that you did reconcile with your husband and, working on things. So maybe talk about that a little bit so we can, put a little different light on it.
Yeah, sure. I think as the point that you raised is a really fair one, that there's a lot of responsibility that comes with this conversation, because it can really quickly start to sound like a condemnation of marriages that don't work out.
Mhm.
And so the thing that I always try to make sure people understand is that the entire reason why my husband and I got back together was because we were both in therapy. We were both being very honest with ourselves and each other about what we were learning about ourselves and about where we were discovering ownership in the problems in our marriage. And I say in the book multiple times, like, the gift of a husband who's been to therapy.
I
And
noticed that.
the thing that I hear from couples the most, because I get emails weekly from men and women talking about how they're beginning a separation and what should I do. And what I hear from the most is that one partner or the other is asking that they go to therapy, either couples or individual therapy, and the other partner is refusing. And I don't know. I don't think that a partnership should ever come back together if one partner is refusing to go to therapy, like if that's what is they're saying is needed. And for us, just on a personal note, the route that we decided to take was to go to individual therapy instead of couples therapy. And I advocate for this all the time because he and I both agreed that we were so broken. Our communication had broken down so much that it didn't feel like there was a healthy path toward reconciliation that involved us sitting in the same room together and having this poor therapist trying to just like keep us from fighting. And so when we went to individual therapy, we both got to have a safe space where we were able to share our own feelings about things without our partner butting in and being like, that's not how that happened, and blah, 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 blah. And so for us both, what happened was that, as I got to talk to my therapist about things in my marriage, there were many things that I got validation for that I needed validation for. I needed someone to tell me, yes, that was wrong. That was wrong what happened there. And you are right to be angry. And I got a lot of feedback about, I think you might be the problem here. Let's talk about how like you might be misreading that, or maybe how are you showing up here? And with both of us getting that separately, when we would come together, we kept having periodic date nights while we were separated. We would come together and sometimes we would fight. And sometimes we would have beautiful conversations where we were both taking ownership for things that we had never taken ownership before. And we were working toward healing. And I that's the only thing that I can credit to us coming back together was being in individual therapy and both being committed to working on ourselves. I think if you don't have that, it's not time yet to even consider reconciliation. But I
Yeah.
do like reminding people that it's possible.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and it makes total sense to me, probably the listeners too as well. So you are a doctor of psychology. Was it hard to go into therapy with someone else, or does that make it easier? I'm just totally
Well,
curious about that.
yeah, so I am a doctor of cognitive psychology, which means,
Okay.
and people don't know this, that there's a difference. Cognitive
Okay.
psychologists are research psychologists.
Oh, okay.
So, usually our path, and this is what I did after I finished my degree, was you go either teach at a university where you're doing research in a lab and teaching, or you go into corporate America and do research at a company. So I don't do therapy with others. I'm not trained in
Oh,
clinical
okay.
psychology.
Okay.
So I actually found that what parts of the Venn diagram between clinical and cognitive psychology come together where they overlap actually created a really nice space for therapy for
Yeah.
me, because there were certain things he would raise that I would be like, oh yes, I'm familiar with that, and we could talk about it. But people
Okay.
always ask that question, and no, I imagine it probably is difficult for therapists to go to therapy because
Sure.
all the tricks they're pulling out of their hat, but no,
Yeah.
that's not something that I deal with.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Yeah. So, but I can see, I know so many other people too that I talk to who have gone through things like this are helping other people, and that's what you're doing. And I love that through your book. And what other things do you do to help? Are you a speaker? Do you do other things along those
Yeah, so
lines?
I do speaking engagements. I write a daily blog. I write for Psychology Today. My column is called Compassionate Feminism, and I'm
Okay.
trying to bring back some nuance to the conversation because I'm finding, and this is, I think, related to your question, even though I'm taking a side road to get there, is that in a lot of the discourse that we're having, particularly in public spaces, seems to have lost touch with empathy and humanity and nuance. And I find that really disheartening And where I'm at right now with the content that I'm creating, the things that I'm writing, the next book that I'm working on is okay, a lot of us are very wounded. And from our wounds, we are bringing forth some ugliness that potentially doesn't align very well with our actual stated values. And
Uh,
so, to give an example, the reason why I have my Compassionate Feminism blog is because a few years ago, around the time of my separation, I was angry. I was so angry at coming on social media and having always dealt with sexism, but now having an enormous platform where millions of people are finding my videos and I'm getting terrible men in my comments. It radicalized me so bad. It made me so angry at men that I went on about a year long spree of just man hate. Like that's the only way you can put it. It's just I was so angry at men, and I did a lot of damage during that time because there were men who came across my path who maybe needed to hear about misogyny and sexism and how do we make change, and I completely alienated them. So my stated value is that I want to end patriarchy. I want to bring gender equality. I want men and women to be equals. And yet the way I was doing that was by pushing men down. Instead of trying to bring us as equals, I was trying to just reverse it. And so what I'm working on right now is trying to show people through example that like even when we're wounded, we have to be behaving in ways that are aligned with our values. And so if my stated value is I want gender equality, just as one example, then I need to be treating men with care and compassion and empathy and respect. And we've lost sight of that in a lot of our conversations, not just about gender equality, but across the
right.
board.
Right. Oh, Amber, I think that's such a great point. And I guess I hadn't really thought about that. But now that you say that, like that is exactly what is happening with other lots of different things. And we won't go into everything else, but what a great way to look at it. And I bet that was kind of like a self-realization where, oh yeah, I'm doing that, aren't I?
Yeah. And it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, where you have to go, I feel maybe a little bit of shame around the way that I've been behaving. And what do I do now? How do I fix that? And it's
Yeah.
it's scary, but really, really great work.
Yeah. Just to ask that question is a big step, I think. And
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's lifelong, it's like one of the hardest things about having written a book like this one and doing the work that I do is that I'm still on that journey. Like I'm still
Mhm.
I'm still working on that. I'm still putting my foot in my mouth. I'm still doing things that don't represent my values because I'm triggered and I'm wounded. And so it's just I think that also along with everything else has to be a healthy dose of humility and self-compassion and forgiveness as we go along that path.
Yes, and that's sometimes hard to do, but I'm sure once you get there, it's amazing and worth it. Yeah, I wrote down in my notes, self-care is work, so it's not
It
easy.
really is. Oh.
Yeah. So tell us about your new project, your Aging Defiantly. What's that all about?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited about this project. I actually just got feedback from my literary agent about it. And it was really interesting because I originally titled it, stick with me. I originally titled it Brave Beyond 30, Aging Defiantly in a Culture Obsessed with Youth. And I wanted this book to be particularly for women in their 20s and 30s who are just now wrapping their minds around, like 20s because they're going to get there and 30s because they're in the thick of it. And I wanted it to be like a love letter to that demographic in particular. And so the book, as I wrote it and how I structured it, was kind of like walking through releasing our 20s, embracing our 30s and 40s, and preparing for the 50s and beyond. And when my literary agent took a look at the manuscript, she said something that I love her. She was like, this is all wrong because every woman who's older than 30 is going to roll her eyes at you for like, oh, this little 39-year-old woman trying to tell us what aging is like. She's like, but the stuff in this book is so important and so good. You have to rethink this because all the things that you're talking about and the releasing your 20s and 30s and then it happens at all ages. She was like, so let's figure out how we restructure this. And so we've been working on that. So now we have it broken down into like the art of the glow up, the art of the grow up, the art of the show up, and the go with the flow up. And so they're about our changing bodies and faces. That's the glow up, embracing that and celebrating it. The art of the grow up is all about embracing the wisdom and authenticity that comes with maturing. The art of the show up is pushing against cultural norms and expectations that try to make women invisible as we age and
Yes.
demanding representation as we get older. Because I have a chapter that's called Aging Out of the Female Lead, where you make that realization one day where you're like, I don't see any female leads who look like me. They're all in their 20s. Like
Mm.
from now on, every romance that I see, every romance novel that I read is going to have a 20 something year old ingenue. And you realize, man, I'm not represented anywhere and I'm only 39, like so demanding that representation and shifting these cultural norms. And then lastly, embracing with courage and with excitement and with a little bit of irreverence the changes that are coming our way. And so I'm just, it's a work in progress still, but I'm
Yeah.
very, very excited about it.
Oh my gosh, I got goosebumps just you talking about it. So you're gonna have to come back and talk to us again about all that when
Oh,
we
I'd
have
love
that.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And I'm on a kind of a quest to kind of build a community of women at this age, and this what you're just talking about would fit in so well. So you definitely need to come back, and I've got some projects coming. And anyway, so yeah, that would be amazing to have you come back and talk about that, because you're right, there's, as we get older, we are diminished in society's view, and you're right, there aren't many people our age out there, in the spotlight or whatever. So I love that, keep going.
I would love to work with you too, because something that I'm going to do for the book is I'm going to be doing some like surveys and questionnaires where I'm going to
Ah,
ask people to fill them out and tell us their stories, answer some open-ended questions about things, and I'm going to include some
sure.
of them in the book. So I would love,
Yeah.
love, love to get to work with you on that. Maybe reach out to your audience members, collecting some of that data.
Definitely. That would be amazing. Would love that. Yes. Yay. I love it when
Okay.
people connect. Yay. Um, so Amber, where would people find you if they want to learn more about you, grant or get your wisdom? I know you said you're on social media. Tell us where we can find you.
Sure. So one of the first places I would tell people to go is to my blog, amberwardell.com, because when you go to that website, the first thing that's going to pop up is a way to get a free digital download. It's a 16-page digital download called The Next Best Thing to Therapy. And it's for people who maybe like aren't quite ready to go into therapy, but are ready to start that work of mental health and self-care at home. So it's got journal prompts in it, it's got questionnaires, and it's got reading materials and things like that in it. So just a great free resource if they want to get access to that. And then you can find me on most social media sites as sensible_Amber. And then, of course, my column on Psychology Today is called Compassionate Feminism. So you can find some of my writings there.
Awesome. We will put links to all those in the show notes for people to find you. Yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could just keep going, but before we say goodbye, is there any one last little message that you want to leave with our listeners?
I think it would be this, and it's a cliche, but I always say to people, sometimes cliches become cliche because they are true and we don't hear them enough. And so the thing that I would leave people with is that self-care is not selfish. And I know we've all heard that so many times, but I would ask women to really take a second and think about what that means and why they have come to think that self-care is selfish. Because I think the first thing we need to do is begin asking ourselves, who planted this idea in our head? What motives did they have for making us believe that as women, taking care of ourselves is wrong and somehow against our nature? And so when I say self-care isn't selfish, it's an invitation to think more deeply about how we arrived at that belief in the first place.
I love that. I don't think we can hear that enough. I think that's wonderful. So, Amber, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And I'm sure this won't be the last time that we chat.
No, I could just keep talking to you forever. This has been so
Yeah.
fun.
Oh, wonderful. Awesome. Well, we'll save it for another day. Then we will talk again. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
You've been listening to Midlife with Courage. If you liked what you heard, I would love it if you would leave me a review, or even better, send a link of this episode to a friend. Until next time, take care of your beautiful self.